Hey guys, it's Candace from Beacon Hill Books. Boy, it's been a while since I posted, and I have a lot of books to tell you about that I have been reading, even though I haven't been videotaping. So I thought about what best to do in terms of my past books, but what I want to tell you about, what I'm currently reading and almost finished with, is The Shadow of What Was Lost. I think I'll finish it today, if not early tomorrow morning. You've probably seen this on BookTube, on a few other channels. There is Cheryl from Sierra Flames Fan, Mel from Mel's Bookland Adventures, and Dee from Books and Quirks. And we have all fallen in love with this book. James Islington does a great job. I think this is a good mashup of the Great Coat series in terms of the pacing. It's very quick, lots of surprises and things going on, and a fantasy novel. We will definitely be continuing this series. We follow three main characters mostly. It takes place starting at a magic school, and we're in the midst of a war now. I don't want to give too much away, but all I can say is we all have extremely enjoyed this book. I like the pace of it and their quick chapters. I like that in every reading, like every 2 to 3 chapters, there's something surprising happening. And that makes it fun to read. We all really, really liked this book. Highly recommend. So, in terms of, I'm going to try and work my way backwards in what I read. I finished Hunger, a Memoir of My Body by Roxanne Gay. This was highly, highly recommended by Mara Sinclair at Books Like Whoa. And I listened to this on audio, so it was Roxanne Gay's voice. And I ended up giving this, I think, a 4-star. She packed a lot of punch in this book. It must have taken so much courage and guts to write what she did for this book. It's a lot about her body, what she's been through, which includes a rape, and, growing up and finding her sexuality, and especially given that she went through a rape. Being a Black woman and, being overweight. And it was a good, that's why we read, right, is to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And I think that this book accomplished that very well. And I'm grateful that she did this. It must have been very, very hard for her. I was very, very impressed. The next book I read was Manhattan Beach by Jennifer Egan, and this book has already been nominated for, I think, the National Book List Award. I'm not very familiar with the awards, but it's gotten a lot of hype, and it was just recently released this month. I got this off of NetGalley, I think a month ago or more, because it was recommended from a reviewer I really like, and it started off great with a great premise. We're following this 12-year-old girl named Anna Kerrigan. She's with her father, and she's, unbeknownst to her, visiting a mobster's house on the beach. She didn't know her dad was involved. So fast forward, and her dad is missing. And they're in the midst of the Depression during World War II, and she is a very strong-minded individual and decides that she's not helping enough in the war efforts, and she wants to be a female diver, even though there's no other females in that occupation at the time. She asserts herself and proves people wrong to get the job, on top of starts having a social life, and actually runs into the mobster that she was with before, named Dexter Stiles, but doesn't tell Dexter that she knew him from before. And it's the story of her growing up, during the war, and trying to figure out what happened to her father, their family drama that happened. She has a sister that has special needs, and it also does follow Dexter Stiles. So you follow Anna, Dexter, and and I'll leave it at that. I really enjoyed the historical detail that Egan gave us in terms of the Brooklyn Naval Yard during that time. It was very well researched. That was my favorite part about the book. It took me over a month to read the book. I just wasn't drawn in. I only really wanted to follow Anna's perspective. So I would rate that a 3 to 3.5 stars. I finished one of my most anticipated reads of this year, Sourdough by Robin Sloan. Robin Sloan is one of my favorite authors. I mean, I like his technical aspects of the writing. This book also takes place in San Francisco. When I first heard it was about cooking, I was a little surprised given Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. How can you marry technology with cooking? Well, he did it, and he did it brilliantly. It's a short book, so enjoyable. It's light reading. It's humorous, and yet I learned a lot. It follows a young woman who moves to San Francisco for a tech job, and she is working like crazy and doesn't have anything to eat. A lot of people at her company eat slurries that are like genetically modified gel. It just allows them to continue plugging away. So she starts calling out to this spicy restaurant, Clement Street, down the road from her to get some takeout, and it changes her life. She's obsessed with the soup and more specifically the bread, the sourdough, and she orders it every night, like embarrassingly so, like Elaine from Seinfeld with her Chinese. The restaurant ends up deciding, the two guys that own the restaurant, that they're going to move, so they give her a little crock pot with a sourdough starter, and her adventures from there. It's a great book. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. If that sounds interesting to you, if you liked Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore, you'll like this book. I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith, and I wanted to get to this book for a long time, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is a classic book that takes place in the United Kingdom. It follows this family, this dysfunctional family that lives in a old, broken down castle, and they're just kind of like squeaking by. Their life changes when two gentlemen come into their lives that actually own the castle, and I can't really speak to it well enough. You'll have to Google other reviews, but if you were considering reading this, I think you will get a kick out of it. It's one of those like coming to age stories. The narrator is hilarious. Like, I loved her. I loved the characters, like her stepmom, who they say like would commune in nature and like go outside, and they were just wacky. And her dad, who was an author, but he only finished one book and then couldn't really write anymore after he was put into jail from this incident with a cake knife. It's also a sort of love story, although it might not have ended how I wanted it to end. I could have read a million more books like this. Like, I wish she had continued on with the narrator's story as she grew up, because it was just so enjoyable. I gave it 4 stars. I listened to We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. That's a very quick audiobook if you're looking for something. I think it was 45 minutes at a higher speed, and I'm really glad that I picked it up. It made me think, and as most of these books, like, that's what I want out of a book. I need to read some more by her. I gave that 4 stars. It obviously is about her thoughts about feminism and how we all need to stand up and try and, stand up for equal rights. Finished We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, and as I said in another video, this made me slightly obsessed with Shirley Jackson. I know this book can be hit and miss for people. It's an odd book. It's brief, it's kind of unresolvable, but I loved it. And I, after that, went and read The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, which is just like a very, very, very short story. And as someone that I get the perception she thinks that she was an outcast, writing these stories, like, I loved it. And I want to read more about her. She moved to Bennington, Vermont, following her husband, who was a professor and writer, I think. And they didn't quite fit into society, or at least Shirley Jackson didn't. And being from Vermont and kind of feeling that way sometimes when you're growing up, that you don't fit in. And I loved it. You're kind of following an unreliable narrator named Mary Cat, and the city's suspicion that you have killed your family, poisoned them. I loved her thought process. She was a little out there, so I really, really liked this book. I gave it 4 stars. I read March, book 1 by John Lewis, Andrew Iden, and illustrated by Nate Powell. That was an extremely powerful graphic novel. I highly recommend it. I've since picked up book 2 and 3. And I finished The Obelisk Gate with a buddy read with Dee. I gave that 3 stars. It was still enjoyable, but I struggled with parts of it. I definitely will continue the series, but I think I liked book 1 a little bit better. I did a buddy read with Cheryl at Sierra Flames Fan and Dee from Books and Quirk on Pachinko, and we all absolutely loved that book. It was so good. Family drama based on really a mother and a daughter, but this daughter, they started off in Korea and moved to Japan, and how going through the war and how the Japanese treated the Koreans, even years after the war, even if they were born in Japan, they're treated like second-class citizens. And the poverty and the embarrassments that they all had to go through, it was heartbreaking in points, but it was a saga, like a family saga that I enjoyed following along and going through those highs and lows with them. You really care about the characters, and I learned a little bit about the culture as well. I just really, really highly recommend that. I gave that 4 stars as well. The same group of us, we read In the Woods, which was by Tana French. That's the Dublin Murder Squad #1. I know this is a very popular book. It was feeling fall and spooky, and we wanted to read it. I'm glad we did. It was different than I thought it was going to be. I don't need to go into the details because you've heard it probably a million times. I ended up giving it 3 stars, and I will continue on in the series. It fell short with some of my expectations, but I'm still glad that I read it. And my last book that I read was The Murder of Mary Russell by Laurie R. King, which concludes my Mary Russell series, 14 books. I didn't read all of the half books. And this book, I talked a little bit about in my updates. It's primarily based off of Mrs. Hudson and her past. I really liked it. I think it ended the series on a high note. I would have thought that I'd want to hear more about Mrs. Hudson's backstory, but given what was happening in the present day with Mary Russell being kidnapped, that storyline was more urgent, and like I wanted to read that more than I did about Mrs. Hudson's past. So I struggled with that a little bit, but it was still a great story. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I read the series. And I have since been looking for new ones, which I've got some recommendations about, but if you have others, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And now that huge video is going to go up, let me know if you've read any of these books, if you agree, or what you thought about them. And if any of the books that I talked about that I liked, you can think of similar books like that, please leave those suggestions below as well. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you so much for watching.